The smell of a courtroom is distinct. It's a mixture of lemon furniture polish, stale coffee, and the cold, metallic scent of anxiety. I sat there, pressing my back against the hard wood of the bench, trying to make myself as small as possible while my father, Harold, stood 20 feet away, systematically destroying what was left of our family history. "Your Honor, all she does is embarrass me." Harold's voice didn't even shake. It was steady, practiced, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years arguing cases in rooms just like this one. He gestured in my direction, a dismissive flick of his wrist, as if I were a stain on the carpet rather than his only child. I watched him adjust the cuffs of his expensive suit, the same suit I knew he couldn't actually afford, and listened as he explained to the judge why I didn't deserve a single penny from my grandmother's estate. He listed my failures with a terrifying precision. He spoke of my lack of a career, my mysterious absences, my refusal to join the family law firm, and my supposed instability. To anyone listening who didn't know the truth, I sounded like a disaster. A driftless, ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her dying grandmother while her heroic father stepped in to save the day. I remained silent, devastated by this public humiliation from the man who was supposed to love me unconditionally. I wanted to scream, to stand up and shout the truth, but I knew that in this room, outbursts were seen as weakness. So I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Suddenly, the rhythm of the room changed. Judge Patricia Hernandez, a woman with silver hair pulled back into a severe bun and eyes that looked like they could see through concrete, leaned forward. She hadn't looked up from her paperwork for the last 10 minutes, but now she fixed Harold with a penetrating stare that made the air in the room grow heavy. "You really don't know, do you?" The question hung in the air, soft but dangerous. Harold's attorney, Marcus, froze mid-sentence. He was holding a stack of legal documents that suddenly seemed very heavy in his hands. I saw Marcus glance sideways at Harold, a flicker of panic in his eyes. I watched Harold's confident expression crumble just a fraction, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. His face, which had been flushed with the exertion of his speech, drained completely of color. "My name is Sierra. I never imagined I would be sitting in a courtroom, listening to my own father tear apart my character to secure an inheritance. But money does strange things to people, especially people who are desperate." The mahogany-paneled room felt suffocating as Harold tried to regain his momentum, continuing his relentless assault on my reputation. He claimed I was unstable, irresponsible, and therefore unfit to inherit anything from my beloved grandmother Eleanor's estate. The irony was so sharp, it almost made me laugh. Here was a man who had spent 28 years of my life dismissing every achievement I'd ever accomplished. When I graduated valedictorian from high school, he shrugged it off as just book smarts, claiming I had no common sense. When I earned my business degree magna cum laude from Northwestern, he called it a worthless piece of paper that wouldn't teach me about the real world. When I started my first nonprofit organization at 23, he laughed in my face and told his friends I was playing pretend businesswoman. What Harold didn't know, what he had never bothered to discover because he was too busy talking about himself, was that for the past 2 years, I had been the anonymous donor keeping his struggling law practice financially afloat. I shifted in my seat, catching Marcus's eye. The attorney looked away quickly, a bead of sweat tracking a path down his temple. Marcus knew. He had to know. He was the one processing the mysterious monthly payments that had saved Caldwell and Associates from bankruptcy. He had tried multiple times to trace the source of the funds, likely hoping to secure a more permanent relationship with this angel investor, only to hit dead ends created by the legal barriers I had carefully constructed. He knew someone was saving them, but he had no idea that the savior was the woman his client was currently calling a failure. Harold continued his monologue, completely unaware that his own attorney was silently panicking beside him. "Your Honor, my daughter has never shown any responsibility or commitment to anything meaningful. She drifts from one failed venture to another, never contributing anything substantial to society or our family." Judge Hernandez maintained her focused attention on Harold while making notes on the papers before her. She had a reputation for thorough preparation. They said she read every footnote, every appendix, every scrap of paper filed in her court. The fact that she seemed to possess information Harold didn't have made my pulse quicken with a strange mixture of anxiety and hope. I had been dreading this day for months. When my grandmother Eleanor passed away 6 months ago at 87, I had grieved not just for her loss, but for the complicated, painful silence that had defined our relationship in her final years. Grandmother had been my champion throughout my childhood. She was the one who bought me books, who listened to my wild ideas, who told me I could be anything. She was the buffer between me and Harold's constant criticism. But something had changed in the last 5 years of her life. It had been a slow, agonizing drift. Our weekly phone calls became monthly, then stopped altogether. My letters went unanswered. My visits were politely declined by her caretakers or by Harold himself, claiming she was too tired, too confused, or simply didn't want to see me. I assumed she had grown tired of my struggles to establish myself. I assumed that Harold's constant criticisms had finally influenced her opinion of me. The pain of losing her emotional support long before I lost her physically had been devastating. But I had channeled that hurt. I took all that rejection and poured it into my work. I built something meaningful, something that would have made the grandmother I remembered proud, even if she had seemingly stopped caring. Harold had positioned himself as the devoted son. He painted a picture of himself sitting by Eleanor's side, managing her finances and medical care, while I was supposedly too selfish to pick up the phone. In his petition to contest the will, he framed himself as the only logical heir to Eleanor's substantial estate, which included not only her house and savings, but also significant shares in various business ventures. The courtroom felt heavy with tension as Marcus finally found his voice, trying to steer the ship away from whatever iceberg the judge had spotted. Your Honor, perhaps we should review the documentation you mentioned earlier in chambers before proceeding with testimony. Judge Hernandez smiled. It was an expression that somehow managed to be both warm and absolutely terrifying. No, Counselor. I think it's important that everyone present understands the full scope of what we're discussing today. The evidence I've reviewed presents a very different picture of Miss Sierra than what her father has described. Harold's confidence began to waver. He looked from the judge to Marcus and back again. What evidence, Your Honor? I've known my daughter her entire life. I think I'm qualified to speak about her character and capabilities. That's when the first crack appeared in Harold's armor. I felt the slightest flutter of hope in my chest, a feeling I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Judge Hernandez opened a thick file folder and pulled out a stack of official documents. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall courtroom windows illuminated the papers as she spread them across her desk. The dust motes dancing in the light seemed to freeze. Mr. Harold, you've stated that your daughter Sierra has never contributed anything substantial to society. You've characterized her as aimless. However, the federal documentation I have here tells a completely different story. My heart began racing. I had no idea what federal documentation she could possibly have about me in a family inheritance case. Harold's face had gone from pale to an ashy gray. According to records from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Judge Hernandez read, her voice clear and authoritative, Miss Sierra established and currently operates Veterans Haven, a non-profit organization that has provided transitional housing for over 2,000 homeless veterans across 7 states. Judge Hernandez's voice carried a note of admiration that made tears spring to my eyes. Harold's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I could see him struggling to process this information. It didn't fit the narrative he had built in his head. It didn't fit the box he had put me in since I was a child. Veterans Haven was my first major success. It was the organization I had built from nothing, literally from the ground up, after meeting a homeless Marine veteran named Tommy outside a grocery store 3 years ago. I remembered that day vividly. It was raining, a cold, miserable November rain. Tommy was shivering, holding a sign that just said, "Hungry." We talked for 2 hours. I bought him a meal, but I realized a meal wasn't enough. He didn't just need food, he needed dignity. He needed a door he could lock and a bed that was his. What had started as me helping one man find temporary shelter had grown into a network. I had spent sleepless nights writing grant proposals, scouting abandoned properties, and begging local councils for permits. It had grown into a network of transitional housing facilities that provided not just beds, but job training, mental health services, and pathways to permanent housing. I had kept it quiet from Harold because I knew he would find a way to demean it. He would ask how much money it made, and when I said it was a non-profit, he would roll his eyes. But the judge wasn't finished. Additionally, Miss Sierra founded and runs Bright Futures Literacy, which has distributed over 50,000 free books to underprivileged children and established reading programs in 43 rural communities across the Midwest. Bright Futures have been born from my own childhood love of reading, the one thing Harold couldn't take away from me. It was nurtured by countless hours spent in my grandmother's library, curled up in a leather armchair with dust motes floating around me. When I learned that many rural communities had lost their local libraries due to budget cuts, I had started small, buying books with my own money and driving them to schools in tiny towns throughout Kansas and Nebraska in the back of my beat-up sedan. Furthermore, Judge Hernandez continued, her eyes never leaving Harold's face, Miss Sierra's third nonprofit organization, Golden Years Advocacy, has successfully lobbied for legislation protecting elderly citizens from financial exploitation and has recovered over $2 million in stolen assets for senior citizens who were victims of fraud. This revelation hit Harold like a physical blow. I saw him flinch. Golden Years Advocacy was deeply personal to me. It was inspired by the stories I had heard about elderly people being taken advantage of by unscrupulous family members and caretakers. The irony that my own father was now attempting to manipulate inheritance proceedings wasn't lost on me, though I hadn't yet grasped the full scope of his deceptions. Marcus was frantically taking notes, his pen moving wildly across the legal pad. He was clearly trying to figure out how to salvage Harold's case in light of these revelations. His expensive suit seemed to be shrinking as he sweated through what was obviously becoming a professional nightmare. Harold found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "I don't understand, Your Honor. Sierra never told me about any of this. If these organizations actually exist, why would she hide them from her own father?" The judge removed her glasses and fixed Harold with a stare that could have melted steel. "Mr. Harold, did you ever ask your daughter what she did for work? Did you ever inquire about her goals, her projects, her life beyond your own assumptions?" The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my father's face cycle through confusion, anger, and what might have been the beginning of shame. But mostly it was defensive. The truth was, Harold had never asked about my work because he had already decided it wasn't worth knowing about. Every conversation we'd had in recent years had been dominated by his own problems, his struggles with the law firm, his complaints about younger attorneys taking his clients. "Your Honor," Harold said weakly, trying to regain his footing, "even if Sierra has been involved in these activities, that doesn't necessarily demonstrate the financial responsibility needed to manage a significant inheritance. Running a charity is different from managing a complex estate." Judge Hernandez smiled again, and this time it was definitely terrifying. "I'm glad you brought up financial responsibility, Mr. Harold, because that leads us to another interesting revelation." She pulled out another set of documents, these bearing the official seal of the Internal Revenue Service. According to tax records, Miss Sierra's 3 nonprofit organizations have collectively received over $8 million in federal grants over the past 3 years. These grants were awarded based on demonstrated impact, fiscal responsibility, and rigorous government oversight. The number, 8 million, hung in the air like a thunderclap. I had never calculated the total value of the grants my organizations had received all at once. I just focused on the work, on the next project, on the next person who needed help. But hearing it stated so baldly in open court was overwhelming. More importantly, I could see Harold struggling to reconcile this information with his fixed image of me. In his mind, I was a child who needed guidance. In reality, I was managing a budget larger than his law firm had seen in a decade. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. "Your Honor, while Miss Sierra's charitable work is certainly commendable, the question before this court is whether Eleanor's will accurately reflects her intentions regarding the distribution of her estate." "Indeed it is, Counselor," Judge Hernandez replied, "which brings us to the question of why Eleanor might have chosen to leave the majority of her estate to a granddaughter who, according to her son, had become distant and irresponsible in recent years. I felt a stab of pain remembering those final years with my grandmother. The gradual cooling of our relationship had been one of the most heartbreaking experiences of my adult life. Eleanor had been my biggest supporter, my confidant, my inspiration. Her apparent rejection had motivated me to prove myself worthy of the love she had once shown me, even if she was no longer there to see it. Harold straightened in his chair, sensing an opportunity to regain control of the narrative. He latched onto this point like a drowning man grabbing a lifeline. "Exactly, Your Honor. My mother was hurt and confused by Sierra's neglect. She told me repeatedly how disappointed she was that Sierra had stopped visiting, stopped calling, stopped caring about family. I tried to make excuses for Sierra, but Mother knew. She felt abandoned." The judge's expression grew very serious. The warmth vanished from her eyes, replaced by a cold, analytical sharpness. "Mr. Harold, you've just touched on something very important. Tell me, how exactly do you know what your mother's feelings were about Sierra's supposed neglect?" Something in the judge's tone made both Marcus and me sit up straighter. It was the tone of a trap snapping shut. Harold, however, seemed oblivious to the danger he was walking into. He thought he was on safe ground. "Your Honor, I spoke with my mother regularly. I was the one taking care of her, managing her affairs, making sure she wasn't alone. Unlike some people, I understood my family responsibilities." Judge Hernandez nodded slowly. "I see. And during these regular conversations, your mother expressed disappointment about Sierra's lack of contact?" "Absolutely," Harold said, his voice gaining strength. "She was heartbroken. She cried about it." The judge made another note on her papers. "That's very interesting, Mr. Harold, because it contradicts some other evidence I've reviewed. Evidence that suggests your mother's isolation from Sierra might not have been voluntary on either side." I felt the room temperature drop. Harold's confident expression began to crack around the edges. For the first time since entering the courtroom, he looked genuinely worried, not just about the money, but about something else. Judge Hernandez reached into her file and withdrew what appeared to be a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. My heart clenched as I recognized the handwriting. It was mine, and underneath, the careful, shaky script of my grandmother. "Miss Sierra," the judge said gently, "did you write letters to your grandmother during the past 5 years?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The lump in my throat was making it hard to speak. Every month, sometimes more often, but she stopped responding about 3 years ago. I thought she had grown tired of hearing from me. Harold's face had gone completely white. Marcus was staring at the letters with growing horror as he began to understand what they represented. Judge Hernandez untied the ribbon and spread several letters across her desk. "These letters were found in your father's home office, Miss Sierra, hidden in a locked drawer. None of them were ever delivered to your grandmother. Similarly, these letters addressed to you in your grandmother's handwriting were never mailed. They were intercepted." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the bench until my knuckles turned white. For 3 years, I had believed my grandmother had chosen to cut me out of her life. I had written letter after letter, pouring my heart out about my work, my hopes, my love for her, only to receive silence in return. I had gone to bed wondering what I had done wrong. "Your Honor," I managed to say through tears, "I don't understand. Why would my father intercept our correspondence?" Harold stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous. I was protecting my mother. Sierra was constantly asking for money, taking advantage of an elderly woman's generosity. I had to screen her mail to protect Mother's assets." Judge Hernandez's voice cut through Harold's protests like a blade. "Mr. Harold, I've read these letters. Not one of them contains any request for money. In fact, several of them include small checks that Sierra sent to her grandmother for her birthday and Christmas, checks that you apparently cashed without Eleanor's knowledge." The room spun around me. Not only had Harold kept my grandmother and me apart, but he had also stolen the modest gifts I had tried to send her. The birthday checks for $50, the Christmas money to help with her heating bills. I sent them because I knew Harold was tight with money, and I wanted her to have something just for herself. Marcus was frantically whispering to Harold, tugging on his sleeve. probably advising him to stop talking immediately. But Harold was spiraling. He was losing control of the story, and he couldn't handle it. Eleanor was vulnerable. She had dementia. She couldn't make rational decisions about money. Judge Hernandez consulted another document. According to medical records, your mother was never diagnosed with dementia, Mr. Harold. Her physician notes indicate she remained mentally sharp until the day she died. However, these records also show that you were listed as her healthcare proxy and had convinced her doctors that she was becoming confused and paranoid whenever she asked about her granddaughter. The web of lies was unraveling faster than Harold could spin new ones. I realized that my father hadn't just interfered with our relationship out of spite or jealousy. He had systematically manipulated both my grandmother and me to serve his own purposes. He needed her to feel isolated so she would depend entirely on him. He needed me to feel rejected so I would stay away and not ask questions about her finances. The medical records also indicate, Judge Hernandez continued, her voice trembling with controlled anger, that Eleanor repeatedly asked her doctors about letters and calls from her granddaughter. She was told by you, Mr. Harold, that Sierra was too busy with her own life to maintain contact with family. I buried my face in my hands. My grandmother had died believing I had abandoned her. The thought was agonizing. While I was out there helping veterans and children, trying to be the person she wanted me to be, she was sitting alone in her room, wondering why I never called. Harold slumped back into his chair, the fight seeming to drain out of him. I was protecting the family interests, he muttered. Sierra was irresponsible, unreliable. Mother needed stability. Irresponsible? Judge Hernandez's voice rose slightly, echoing off the mahogany walls. Mr. Harold, while you were telling your mother that Sierra was too busy to visit, Sierra was building organizations that have positively impacted thousands of lives. While you convinced Eleanor that Sierra didn't care about her, Sierra was sending loving letters and financial support that you intercepted and stole. Marcus finally managed to get Harold's attention and whispered urgently in his ear. Harold nodded reluctantly and sat back, his eyes fixed on the table. But the damage was already done. The truth was out, and it was uglier than anyone could have imagined. The silence in the courtroom wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the ghosts of things unsaid and letters unread. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, trying to compose myself, but the image of my grandmother waiting for a letter that never came was burned into my mind. Your Honor, I said, finding my voice despite the emotional turmoil churning in my gut. If my grandmother knew the truth about my work, about the letters I wrote, would she have wanted to see me before she died? It was the question that had haunted me for 6 months. Had she died angry? Had she died thinking I didn't love her? Judge Hernandez's expression softened. The steely gaze she had trained on Harold melted into something maternal, something deeply sad. Miss Sierra, I have additional evidence that suggests your grandmother not only would have wanted to see you, but that she took specific steps to ensure your future despite the barriers your father had created. She reached for another file. This one wasn't a standard manila folder. It was a dark, textured portfolio marked with the seal of a private investigator's office. The sound of it hitting the desk was a dull thud that echoed in the quiet room. 6 months before her death, Judge Hernandez said, her fingers tracing the edge of the file, your grandmother hired a private investigator to locate you and learn about your current circumstances. She had grown suspicious of your father's explanations for your absence. She knew her son, and she knew you. The math didn't add up, and Eleanor was never one to ignore a discrepancy. Harold made a choking sound, a sort of strangled gasp. That's impossible. Mother never left the house. She didn't have access to... She had a telephone, Mr. Harold, the judge interrupted, her voice sharp, and she had a mind of her own, despite your efforts to convince her doctors otherwise. I stared at the portfolio. My grandmother had been looking for me. While I was out there feeling rejected, she was searching. The investigator's report details everything, the judge continued. It details Sierra's nonprofit work, her federal recognition, and her positive impact on communities across multiple states. Eleanor received weekly updates. She knew about Veterans Haven. She knew about the book drives. She was not only proud of what you had accomplished, but she was also furious about the deception that had kept you apart. Furious. The word felt like a gift. She wasn't indifferent. She wasn't disappointed. She was furious on my behalf. Judge Hernandez opened the investigator's file and pulled out a handwritten document. The paper was cream-colored, delicate. I recognized the stationery immediately. It was the set I had bought her for her 80th birthday. This is a letter your grandmother wrote but never had the chance to send, found among her personal effects by the investigator, and kept safe until this proceedings. Would you like me to read it aloud, Miss Sierra? I nodded, unable to trust my voice. I gripped the armrests of my chair, bracing myself. My dearest Sierra, Judge Hernandez began. Her reading voice was gentle, stripping away the legalese to reveal the heart beneath. I have learned the truth about why you disappeared from my life, and my heart is broken. Not by your absence, but by my son's cruelty in keeping us apart. I have seen the photos the investigator brought me, photos of you handing out keys to veterans, photos of you reading to children in school gymnasiums. I am so proud of the woman you have become. You are everything I hoped you would be, and more. You are the legacy I always wanted to leave behind. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. It was like feeling her hand on my shoulder one last time. I should have trusted my instincts about Harold's explanations years ago, the letter continued. I pray that someday you will forgive an old woman for not seeing through his lies sooner. I have taken steps to ensure that you receive what you deserve, not just from my estate, but from life itself. Do not let his bitterness dim your light. All my love, Grandmother Eleanor. The silence that followed was profound. I could hear my own ragged breathing. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear the terrifying reality of what Harold had done settling over the room like dust. Harold sat motionless, staring at his hands. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The bluster was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a man who had gambled his family for control and lost everything. Marcus, his attorney, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the universe. He was shifting his weight, checking his watch, perhaps calculating if he could sprint for the exit without being held in contempt. But Judge Hernandez wasn't finished. I saw her glance at the clock, then back at the pile of documents. There was still a stack remaining. She carefully placed my grandmother's letter back in its file, treating it with more reverence than she had treated any of Harold's legal motions. Judge Hernandez cleared her throat, shifting the atmosphere in the room from emotional to clinical. The tears were done. Now came the hammer. Mr. Harold, you've built your argument for inheriting your mother's estate largely on your role as the responsible son. You claim you managed her business affairs and maintained the family law firm, Caldwell and Associates, that she helped establish with your father. Is that correct? Harold nodded slowly. He seemed to sense a trap, but he couldn't see the mechanism yet. Yes, Your Honor. Mother was a partner in Caldwell and Associates. She trusted me to maintain the firm's reputation and profitability. It's a family legacy. And you consider yourself the rightful owner of the firm, having operated it for the past 15 years since your father's retirement? Of course, Harold said, a flicker of his old pride returning. I've dedicated my career to building that practice. I'm the managing partner. I'm the face of the firm. Judge Hernandez smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who has cornered its prey. That's interesting, Mr. Harold, because according to these corporate filings from 5 years ago, your mother transferred her partnership shares in Caldwell and Associates. Harold frowned. Transferred? To whom? She never sold them. No, she didn't sell them. She gifted them. Judge Hernandez picked up a document with a gold seal at the bottom. She transferred her entire interest in the firm to your daughter, Sierra, making her the majority owner of Caldwell and Associates. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. It was a physical silence, a vacuum where the air had been sucked out of the room. Harold's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, denial, and finally, a dawning horror as the implications became clear. That's impossible, Harold whispered. His voice was thin, reedy. Sierra doesn't know anything about running a law firm. She's never even worked there. She's a child. Actually, Judge Hernandez continued, consulting the documents with infuriating calmness, The transfer was quite legal and properly executed. Your mother retained a small percentage of ownership, but Sierra became the controlling shareholder with 65% of the company. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my chair. I gripped the table. Me? I owned the firm? The firm where I wasn't allowed to intern because Harold said I didn't have the temperament for law? The firm that had been the center of our family's universe for 2 generations? I had no knowledge of owning any part of Harold's law firm. The idea seemed absurd. But then, I remembered a stack of papers my grandmother had asked me to sign during one of my visits 5 years ago, right before the communication stopped. She had told me they were just updates to her insurance policies, ensuring I was a beneficiary. I had signed them without reading the fine print because I trusted her implicitly. She must have been planning this back then, seeing the writing on the wall long before I did. Marcus had gone completely silent. His pen was frozen above his legal pad. I looked at him and I saw the wheels turning. If I was the owner, and he was representing Harold against me, Judge Hernandez wasn't done twisting the knife. Furthermore, she said, pulling out a stack of bank statements, let's discuss the finances of Caldwell and Associates. The firm has been struggling for years, hasn't it, Mr. Harold? Harold wiped sweat from his upper lip. The legal market has been challenging. We've had cash flow issues. It's a temporary downturn. Is it? Judge Hernandez raised an eyebrow. Because according to these records, the firm would have gone bankrupt 2 years ago if not for a series of anonymous injections of capital. Monthly payments of nearly $12,000, totaling over $300,000 to date. Harold nodded vigorously, seemingly relieved to talk about something other than ownership. Yes, we have a private investor, a silent partner who believes in the firm's potential. Marcus handled the arrangements. Judge Hernandez looked at Marcus, then back to Harold. And did you never wonder who this silent partner was? Who would pour that much money into a failing small-town law firm with no return on investment? I trusted Marcus to handle it, Harold said, glancing nervously at his attorney. Judge Hernandez turned her gaze to me. Miss Sierra, would you like to explain the source of those funds? I swallowed hard. I had never intended for Harold to know. I had done it out of guilt, out of a misplaced sense of duty. I watched him struggle, heard him complain about losing the house, about failing his father's legacy, and I couldn't bear it. Even when he was cruel to me, he was still my father. The money came from me, I said quietly. Harold blinked. What? Through a trust fund I established, I explained, my voice gaining strength. I quietly transferred over $300,000 to Caldwell and Associates. I set it up as a blind trust so you wouldn't know it was me. I didn't want to bruise your ego. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. For 2 years, I had been watching Harold struggle. For 2 years, he had been calling me a failure, a driftless disappointment, while spending my money to keep the lights on in his office. I had been subsidizing the very platform he used to look down on me. Harold stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward with a loud crash. This is insane. Sierra doesn't have that kind of money. She runs a charity. She's broke. Mr. Harold, Judge Hernandez said calmly, her voice cutting through his hysteria. You've been the managing partner of a firm majority owned by your daughter. The woman you've spent today describing as irresponsible and unfit to inherit anything has actually been your business partner and your primary financial supporter. She has been paying your salary. She has been paying the rent. She has been keeping the wolves from your door. The irony was overwhelming. It was thick and heavy in the air. Harold had spent the morning arguing that I was too incompetent to manage an inheritance, while being completely unaware that I had been successfully managing and subsidizing his own livelihood. Marcus finally found his voice. It was shaky. Your Honor, if Miss Sierra is indeed the majority owner of Caldwell and Associates, then my representation of Mr. Harold in this matter presents a significant conflict of interest? Judge Hernandez finished for him. Indeed it does, Counselor. You are being paid by the firm's funds to sue the firm's owner. It raises interesting questions about who actually has the authority to make decisions about the firm's operations and expenditures. Harold's face had gone from white to red. Anger replaced shock. He pointed a shaking finger at me. Sierra might have some papers with her name on them, but she doesn't know the first thing about practicing law. She's playing games. Those documents don't mean anything if she can't actually do the work." "Actually, Mr. Harold, they mean quite a lot," Judge Hernandez countered. "Sierra's business degree, her demonstrated success in running multiple nonprofit organizations, and her proven ability to secure and manage millions of dollars in federal funding suggest she might be more qualified to run a law firm than you assumed." I looked at Harold. He looked trapped. But the judge was flipping to yet another page in the file, the irregularities section. "Your Honor," I said, "I had no knowledge of owning the firm. Why would my grandmother transfer ownership to me without telling me directly?" Judge Hernandez consulted a document that looked like a forensic accounting report. "According to your grandmother's private papers, she became concerned about your father's financial management of the firm several years ago. She discovered significant irregularities in how he was handling client funds and business expenses. Rather than confront him directly, which she feared would destroy the family, she chose to protect the business assets by transferring control to someone she trusted to maintain ethical standards. She was waiting for the right moment to tell you, but her health declined too rapidly." The word irregularities hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I saw Marcus flinch. He knew what that word meant in a legal context. It meant the end of a career. Harold sank back into his chair, his face ashen once again. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. Judge Hernandez read from the list, her voice monotone but devastating. "Unauthorized loans from the firm's client trust account, inflated expense reports, billing clients for services that were never provided, personal expenses, vacations, cars, clothing, charged to the business accounts." Harold made a strangled noise. "Those were temporary business loans. I always intended to pay them back. The client account. The firm was struggling. I had to make difficult decisions to keep us afloat." "Mr. Harold," Judge Hernandez said sternly, leaning over the bench, "borrowing from client funds is never temporary, and it's never acceptable. It is a violation of every ethical canon in the profession. It's embezzlement, regardless of your intent to repay." Embezzlement. The word hit the courtroom like a lightning strike. I sat there, stunned. I realized that my anonymous financial support hadn't just been helping Harold personally. It had been preventing him from stealing even more. My money had been filling the holes he was digging. I had been unknowingly covering up a crime. Marcus was frantically packing his briefcase. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't get the latch to click. He was clearly trying to distance himself from Harold as quickly as possible. "Your Honor, given these revelations, the conflict of interest, the potential criminal implications, I need to withdraw my representation of Mr. Harold immediately. I cannot be a party to this." "Granted," Judge Hernandez said without hesitation. "Mr. Harold, you have the right to seek new counsel. Though I should inform you that the State Bar Association will be receiving copies of this file immediately following this hearing." Harold looked around the courtroom wildly. He looked at the exit signs. He looked at the gallery. He looked at me. The man who had entered this room confident in his righteousness and authority now faced the possibility of criminal charges, disbarment, and professional ruin. But I sensed that Judge Hernandez still wasn't finished. There was one folder left on her desk, the one with the official seal of the United States government. The transformation from Harold's confident attack to this desperate, cornered animal had been so swift I was struggling to process it all. Everything I thought I knew about my family history was being rewritten in real time. My grandmother hadn't rejected me. She had empowered me. My father wasn't the bedrock of the family. He was the crack in the foundation. Judge Hernandez glanced at the clock on the courtroom wall and then looked directly at me. Her expression shifted again. The anger toward Harold vanished, replaced by a look of profound respect. "Miss Sierra, there's one more matter we need to discuss today. It concerns your immediate future rather than your past." She reached for the final folder. My pulse quickened. I tried to imagine what federal business could possibly relate to our family's inheritance dispute. Had I done something wrong? Had my grants been flagged? 2 weeks ago, Judge Hernandez said, opening the folder, I received an inquiry from the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding your background and character. My mouth went dry. The FBI? This inquiry was not criminal in nature, Miss Sierra. It was part of a comprehensive security clearance investigation. I stared at her. Security clearance? For what? Miss Sierra, you have been selected by the President of the United States for appointment as the inaugural Director of the Rural Development and Community Empowerment Agency. The room seemed to spin. The words floated in the air, disjointed. President, Director, Agency, a newly created federal department, the judge explained, focused on addressing economic inequality in America's small towns and rural communities. Harold made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. That's impossible. Sierra? A federal appointment? She couldn't handle that. She doesn't have the experience. She's just a girl who plays with books. Judge Hernandez turned on him, and her patience finally snapped. Mr. Harold, your daughter's work with Veterans Haven alone has demonstrated her ability to manage complex operations across multiple states while maintaining strict compliance with federal regulations. Her success in securing and properly administering $8 million in federal grants indicates exactly the kind of fiscal responsibility and program management skills required for federal leadership. While you were embezzling from your clients to buy suits, she was auditing her own books to the penny to feed the homeless. I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Your Honor, I had no idea. The selection process was confidential until recently, Judge Hernandez explained. Your reputation came to federal attention through your nonprofit work and your collaboration with various government agencies. The recommendation came directly from the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, who has been impressed with Veterans Haven's innovative approaches to addressing homelessness. She opened the federal folder and pulled out official letterhead bearing the White House seal. It was embossed, heavy stock. Even from this distance, it looked important. The FBI background investigation is standard for all presidential appointees requiring Senate confirmation. During that investigation, they discovered the financial irregularities in your father's law practice. They dug deep, Miss Sierra. They found the intercepted mail. They found the fraud. Harold slumped in his chair. He realized now that this wasn't just a family court matter. The FBI had been looking at him. They had been watching his bank accounts, his communications, his life. The FBI report notes that Harold's actions could be considered obstruction of a federal appointment process, the judge read, given that his interference may have caused emotional distress that could have affected your ability to serve. My head was spinning. A presidential appointment, Senate confirmation, federal leadership. These were possibilities I had never even dared to dream. I just wanted to help people. I just wanted to fix the things I saw broken in the world. Judge Hernandez continued reading. The proposed agency would have an annual budget of $2 billion. $2 billion. The number was so large, I couldn't even conceptualize it properly. Harold's law firm struggled to manage a few $100,000, and here was the federal government suggesting I could handle a budget 4,000 times larger. Your Honor, I said, still struggling to believe this was really happening, when would this appointment take effect? The Senate confirmation process typically takes several months, but given the urgency of rural development needs, the hearing has been fast-tracked for next month. However, she paused, and the weight of the however hung in the room. There was some concern about potential family complications. The White House needs to be confident that your focus won't be divided. The FBI investigation revealed that your father's financial improprieties and manipulation could create ongoing stress and public relations challenges. Harold seemed to realize that his behavior wasn't just affecting our family anymore, but could potentially derail a presidential appointment. He saw an opening, a way to make himself relevant again. Your Honor, he stammered, surely Sierra's personal family matters wouldn't affect her ability to serve. We can handle this privately. Actually, Mr. Harold, they could. Judge Hernandez looked at him with pity. Federal appointees undergo intense public scrutiny. Any ongoing family disputes, especially those involving financial misconduct, could become fodder for political opposition. She pulled out another document from the stack. However, there's an additional complication. The FBI investigation also revealed that your interference with Sierra's relationship with her grandmother may have violated several federal laws. Marcus, who had been quietly trying to blend into the wood paneling, suddenly sat up straight. He looked like he was about to bolt for the door. Harold's face went completely white. What laws? It was a family matter. Intercepting mail intended for another person is a federal crime, Mr. Harold. It's a felony. Cashing checks made out to someone else constitutes mail fraud. Using your position as healthcare proxy to provide false medical information is healthcare fraud. The accumulation of these charges, Judge Hernandez said, counting them off on her fingers, could result in significant federal prison time. We are not talking about a slap on the wrist. We are talking about years in a federal penitentiary. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Harold's labored breathing. It was a ragged, wet sound. The man who had walked into this courtroom confident in his moral authority was now staring into the abyss. Your Honor, I said quietly, what does this mean for my grandmother's estate, and for the federal appointment? Judge Hernandez smiled, and for the first time that day, it was a genuinely warm expression, a smile that reached her eyes. Miss Sierra, your grandmother's will is quite clear. She left you the majority of her estate specifically because she discovered the truth about your accomplishments and your father's interference. She gathered the papers into a neat stack. As for the federal appointment, that decision ultimately rests with you. She handed me the White House letter across the bench. You have 1 week to decide whether you want to accept the nomination. The Senate confirmation hearing has been scheduled pending your acceptance. As I held the official letter in my trembling hands, feeling the embossed seal under my thumb, I realized that my grandmother had somehow orchestrated all of this. Her investigation into my life had not only revealed Harold's deceptions, but it had also likely brought my work to federal attention in the first place. She had been my champion, even from the grave. Harold sat in stunned silence. He was probably calculating whether he had enough money left to hire a criminal defense attorney. He looked at me, and his eyes were hollow. But Judge Hernandez wasn't quite finished. I saw her hand hover over one last piece of paper. I sensed that Harold's final humiliation was still to come. He straightened in his chair, a familiar, desperate, calculating expression crossing his face. Despite everything, the fraud, the theft, the lies, he wasn't ready to admit defeat. He cleared his throat. I recognized that sound. It was the sound he made before he tried to sell a lie. Your Honor, Harold said, his voice gaining a shaky strength. While I appreciate that Sierra has apparently achieved more than I was aware of, the fundamental question remains whether she's prepared for the enormous responsibilities you've described. Judge Hernandez raised an eyebrow but gestured for him to continue. She was giving him enough rope to hang himself. Sierra's success in running small nonprofit organizations, while commendable, hardly qualifies her for a federal directorship managing billions of dollars. If she truly deserves this appointment, it's because of the foundation I provided. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. Even now? Even here? My parenting, Harold continued, warming to his theme, instilled the values and work ethic she displays. Everything she's accomplished can be traced back to me. He was trying to claim credit. He was trying to rewrite history one last time. Your Honor, if Sierra accepts this federal appointment, I should be recognized as having contributed to her preparation. Perhaps the estate distribution should reflect my role in shaping her character. The manipulation was breathtaking. It was a masterclass in narcissism. Judge Hernandez finally spoke, her voice deceptively mild. Mr. Harold, you're suggesting that Sierra's achievements reflect your positive influence? Exactly, Your Honor. Judge Hernandez opened that final file. That's interesting, Mr. Harold, because I have additional evidence about your role in Sierra's financial education. She pulled out a credit report. These records show that when Sierra was 18 and starting college, you were listed as a co-signer on her student loans. However, you used your access to her credit information to secure additional loans in her name without her knowledge. You used her Social Security number to secure 3 separate business loans totaling $150,000. Harold froze. These loans went into default, Judge Hernandez said, her voice hard as granite. damaging Sierra's credit score for 7 years. That is why she struggled to get business loans. That is why she had to work twice as hard. Mr. Harold, identity theft is a federal crime. You damaged your daughter's credit while she was trying to establish herself. You contacted her potential investors and told them she was unstable. You actively sabotaged her business relationships to keep her dependent on you. Judge Hernandez leaned forward, her eyes blazing. You committed identity theft, mail fraud, and embezzlement, and now you want credit for her success? The most remarkable thing about Sierra's achievements is that she managed to build them while her own father was holding the shovel, digging the hole she had to climb out of. Harold slumped back, finally, truly defeated. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Marcus, who had been quietly gathering his papers into a chaotic pile, finally spoke. His voice was tight, the professional veneer completely cracked. Your Honor, I need to formally withdraw from this case immediately. I cannot represent someone facing potential federal charges for identity theft and mail fraud. It creates an impossible ethical breach. Judge Hernandez didn't even look up from her notes. Granted. Mr. Harold, you will need to find new legal representation, though I should warn you that the federal prosecutor's office will be receiving a full copy of this file by the end of the business day. Harold sat in stunned silence. He looked like a man who had walked into a building expecting to buy it, only to have the roof collapse on his head. He finally understood that his attempts to manipulate the situation, to paint himself as the victim, to claim credit for my success, had only made things exponentially worse. The man who had spent the day attacking my character and competence was now facing professional ruin, financial devastation, and the very real possibility of prison time. But I could see from Judge Hernandez's expression that she had one final revelation. The legal housekeeping was done, but the judgment, the actual verdict on our lives, was just beginning. She gathered all the documents spread across her desk into one neat, formidable stack. She looked directly at me. The afternoon sun had shifted again, casting a golden, hazy light through the tall courtroom windows. It felt symbolic, like the dust was settling after a long, violent storm. Miss Sierra, based on all the evidence presented today, this court hereby validates your grandmother's will in its entirety. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since the funeral. You are awarded the full inheritance, Judge Hernandez declared, her voice ringing with finality. This includes Eleanor's house, her savings, her investment portfolio valued at $1.2 million, and her shares in various business ventures. The number hit me like a physical force. 1.2 million, plus property. My grandmother had lived so modestly, clipping coupons and wearing the same winter coat for a decade. I had no idea she had amassed that kind of wealth. She had been saving it, for me. Additionally, Judge Hernandez continued, you are hereby recognized as the legal majority owner of Caldwell & Associates, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. You now have full authority over the firm's operations, personnel decisions, and financial management. Harold made a choking sound, a reflex of denial, but he said nothing. He couldn't. Mr. Harold, the judge turned her gaze on him, and it was withering. This court finds that your interference with Sierra's inheritance, your interception of personal mail, your identity theft, and your other fraudulent activities constitute grounds for significant restitution. She consulted a calculation sheet. You are hereby ordered to repay Sierra the full amount of damages caused by your actions. This includes the value of the intercepted gifts, the cost of credit repair services, the interest accrued on the fraudulent loans, and estimated lost business opportunities due to your sabotage. The court sets this amount at $300,000. $300,000. The amount was staggering. It was almost exactly the amount I had anonymously donated to keep his firm afloat. The symmetry of it was poetic. The money he had taken from me, he now had to give back, but this time, everyone would know the truth. Furthermore, the judge said, closing the folder, the State Bar Association will receive a full report of your ethical violations regarding the client trust accounts. Federal prosecutors will review the evidence of mail fraud and identity theft. Harold seemed to shrink into his chair. He looked physically smaller, like the air was leaking out of him. The man who had entered this courtroom confident in his superiority was now facing the end of his life as he knew it. He was looking at disbarment. He was looking at bankruptcy. He was looking at a jail cell. Judge Hernandez turned back to me. Her face softened, and for a moment, she wasn't a judge. She was just a woman looking at another woman who had survived something difficult. Miss Sierra, regarding the federal appointment, the decision is entirely yours. However, I should note that your handling of this family crisis with dignity and restraint has impressed federal observers. Your character has been tested under extreme circumstances today. You sat here while your father lied about you, and you remained composed. You have demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity the government seeks in its leaders. I took a deep breath. I looked at the White House letter on the table. I looked at the files detailing the good work my nonprofits had done. I thought about the veterans sleeping in warm beds because of Veterans Haven. I thought about the kids reading books because of Bright Futures. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady, I accept the presidential nomination. I believe I can serve the American people effectively while honoring my grandmother's memory and the values she taught me. Excellent, the judge smiled. The Senate confirmation hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. You'll be contacted by White House personnel to begin the preparation process. The hearing was effectively over. Marcus was already halfway to the door, not even waiting for a formal dismissal. Judge Hernandez was organizing her papers. But I wasn't done. I looked at Harold. He was sitting with his head in his hands, defeated, silent, broken. I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was grief for the years lost with my grandmother, years he had stolen. There was anger at his betrayals, at the sabotage that had made my 20s so much harder than they needed to be. But beneath all that, looking at his slumped shoulders, I felt something else. I felt pity. And I felt the weight of my grandmother's letter. Do not let his bitterness dim your light. If I destroyed him completely, if I let him go to prison, let him starve, let him die alone and disgraced, I would be perpetuating the same cycle of cruelty he had started. I would be proving that power only exists to crush people. Your Honor, I said quietly. Judge Hernandez paused, looking up. Yes, Miss Sierra? Regarding Caldwell and Associates, and my father's future, I would like to make a proposal. Harold looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, wary. He expected me to twist the knife. He expected me to fire him on the spot, right there in the record. Judge Hernandez nodded slowly, intrigued. Go on. I turned my chair so I was facing Harold directly. Harold, I said. I didn't call him Dad. I couldn't. Not right now. You are facing criminal charges that will likely end your career. You owe me $300,000 you don't have. You are about to lose everything. He flinched, but he didn't look away. I am the owner of the firm, I continued, and as the owner, I have the authority to make personnel decisions. I am willing to offer you a position. Harold blinked. A position? You can continue working at Caldwell and Associates, I said, but not as a partner, not as a manager. You will work as a junior associate. The room went silent. A junior associate. It was an entry-level position, the kind of job a 25-year-old fresh out of law school would take. You will work under strict supervision, I detailed. I will hire an external ethics officer to audit your work weekly. You will complete continuing legal education courses on professional responsibility, double the state requirement. You will have no access to client trust accounts, none. Harold opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. Your salary will be sufficient to live modestly. The rest of your earnings will be garnished to pay the restitution you owe me and to repay the client funds you borrowed. I looked at Judge Hernandez. This offer is contingent on Harold completing a comprehensive ethics program, making full financial restitution over time, and accepting responsibility for his actions without excuse or justification. He will also need to write formal letters of apology to every client and business contact he misled about my character, including the investors he lied to. Judge Hernandez looked from me to Harold. A slow smile spread across her face. It was a look of approval, of respect. That seems both just and merciful, Miss Sierra. It offers a path to restitution without destroying the individual. It is very wise. I looked back at Harold. Harold, I'm offering you a chance to rebuild your life. I'm offering you a chance to earn back some measure of respect through honest, hard work, just like I had to do. But this is the only opportunity you will have. If you violate the terms in any way, if you steal a paperclip, if you lie to a client, if you attempt any further manipulation, you will be terminated immediately, and I will personally hand the evidence to the district attorney to pursue maximum prison time. Harold stared at me. He looked at the wreckage of his ego scattered around the courtroom. He looked at the daughter he had underestimated his entire life, the daughter who now held his fate in her hands. For the first time in my life, I saw the mask fall away completely. There was no arrogance left, no bluster, just a frightened, aging man who realized he had been wrong about everything. "Sierra," he whispered. His voice was trembling. I don't understand. Why would you help me? After everything I've done, I thought about my grandmother. I thought about the veterans I worked with who just wanted a second chance. "Because," I said, feeling the weight of the truth in my chest, "someone once taught me that true strength comes not from revenge, but from choosing to break cycles of harm." Grandmother Eleanor believed in redemption through action, not just words. She loved you, despite your flaws. I'm giving you the chance to prove you can learn from your mistakes and become the person she always hoped you could be. Tears welled up in Harold's eyes and spilled over, genuine tears. "I accept your terms, Sierra," he said, his voice breaking. "And I am sorry. I'm truly sorry. For the letters, for the loans, for everything." He lowered his head, shoulders shaking. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was a start. Judge Hernandez made a final note on her documents. The sound of her pen on the paper was the only sound in the room. "This court is adjourned," she declared. "Miss Sierra, congratulations on your inheritance and your federal appointment. Mr. Harold, you have 30 days to secure new legal representation for the criminal matters you'll be facing, though your daughter's testimony regarding your cooperation may mitigate the sentencing. Good luck to you both." She banged the gavel. It was a sharp, clean sound, the sound of an ending and a beginning. As we gathered our belongings, I didn't look back at the empty bench. I walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. The air out there tasted different, lighter, sweet. I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was my phone. A notification from the White House Liaison Office. "Confirmation hearing prep, day 1. I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding afternoon sun. I carried with me not just a substantial inheritance and a federal appointment, but something far more valuable. I carried the knowledge that I had succeeded on my own merits, that my grandmother had been proud of me all along, and that I had the strength to build something meaningful from even the most painful debris. 6 months later. The rose garden is smaller than it looks on television, but the smell of the flowers is overpowering. It smells like history. I stood at the podium, the presidential seal in front of me, the sun warming my face. The President of the United States had just finished introducing me, listing my accomplishments with a gravity that still felt surreal. "And it is my honor to confirm Sierra Caldwell as the Director of the Rural Development and Community Empowerment Agency." The applause rippled across the lawn. I looked out at the audience. I saw senators, dignitaries, cameras, and in the third row, I saw him, Harold. He wasn't wearing his Italian silk suit. He was wearing a modest, off-the-rack suit that fit him a little loosely. He looked older, tired. The last 6 months of working as a junior associate, filing briefs, doing research, answering to an ethics officer, had humbled him. He looked like a man who was working for a living, rather than a man pretending to be important. But as our eyes met, he smiled, and he clapped. He was applauding with genuine pride. For perhaps the first time in my life, he wasn't looking at me and seeing a disappointment. He was looking at me and seeing his boss, seeing his daughter, seeing the woman who had saved him from himself. I nodded to him, a small, imperceptible acknowledgement, and began my speech. That evening, as twilight settled over the city, I drove out to the cemetery. The grass was damp with dew. I walked to the granite headstone under the old oak tree. Eleanor Caldwell, beloved mother and grandmother. I placed a bouquet of fresh white lilies beside the stone, the same flowers she used to grow in her garden. I knelt down, not caring about the grass staining my dress. I touched the cold stone. "We did it, Grandma," I whispered to the evening air. "You were right, about everything." I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It was the first page of the new legislation I was drafting for the agency, the Eleanor Act, protecting vulnerable seniors from financial predation. "I named it after you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And Harold, he's trying. He's really trying. He's helping us recover assets for other victims now. He knows all the tricks, so he knows how to catch the people doing it. He's becoming the lawyer you wanted him to be." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree. It felt like a sigh of relief. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for teaching me that the people who try to diminish us often reveal more about their own limitations than ours." I stood up, brushing off my knees. I looked back at the city lights twinkling in the distance. My city, my responsibility. I had walked into a courtroom as a victim, and I had walked out as a leader. I had turned a legacy of lies into a future of truth. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating those who hurt us, it's not crushing them into the dust. Sometimes the greatest victory is helping them find a path to become better people while you rise above them to change the world. That lesson, like so many others, came from a grandmother who loved me enough to see my potential, even when I couldn't see it myself. What about you? Have you ever discovered that someone's negative opinion of you said more about them than it did about you? Have you ever found strength in unexpected places when facing family betrayal or professional challenges? Maybe you've had to make a choice between revenge and mercy. Share your story in the comments below. I read them, and I think we all need to be reminded that resilience is real. Remember that your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see your value. If this story resonated with you, please like this video. It really helps the channel. And subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, justice, and the human spirit. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength today. Thank you for joining me. And remember, sometimes our greatest setbacks become the foundation for our most meaningful comebacks.